Colin Clarke is a senior research fellow at the Soufan Center and focuses on terror. And he's been on this podcast many, many times. Colin, thank you so much for coming back.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, as we speak, I just want to start with the latest news. And UN Chief Guterres is trying to invoke a largely unenforceable clause, Article 99. I never heard of it, demanding a humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. That's what's important about it. The outcry over the displacement of Palestinians, 80 to 90% of them, the hunger, the thirst, the homelessness, the number of civilians dead, over 15,000 now. It seems that Israel cannot continue to hunt Hamas with such a high toll on Palestinians, and yet it is doing just that.
Yeah, you're right. But the images are devastating that are coming out every day. And I think there's growing concern, at least in the Biden administration, to say nothing of this kind of growing chorus internationally, that the Israelis very much risk losing this war in a strategic sense, even as they gain whatever minor tactical victories they think they're gaining by targeting Hamas high-value targets. So international public opinion is very much turning against what Israel is doing. And I think, the fact that we're seeing images on a daily basis, you mentioned 15,000 civilians killed. I've heard figures higher than that, death, displacement. It's really just painful to watch what's happening on a daily basis.
All right. So, 6 weeks ago when all of this started about that, a military affairs correspondent friend of mine in Israel said, we've only got the moral ground for so long. And we know that. We know that the window is narrow. This can't go on a long time. So this is not news to Israel either. I mean, they understand the international pressures of this. But do you think that Netanyahu himself and his right-wing spouses in his convenient power marriage, which allowed him back into power, some of them have been shifted now with this war cabinet, but do you think that he is somebody that cares or it registers with, and why is that important?
My sense is that Netanyahu, as he always has been, is out for himself first and foremost. He's been called Teflon, a survivor, all these things, which are almost positive connotations. But why is he needed to survive? Because he's been tarred with corruption allegations and all sorts of other kind of accusations of impropriety. In fact, I wrote an article for Al Monitor a few weeks ago. My assessment is that Netanyahu's power grab, attempted power grab with the Supreme Court and the judiciary, is largely, one of the main factors that led to the intelligence failure. And if you watch TV and interviews with Israelis that were protesting week after week after week, including, active military members and reservists, they said as much. They said this is impacting military readiness. This is negatively impacting us. And I think we saw that with the response to October 7th.
What's the danger if Israel responds to public opinion, international pressure, and stops this, leaving Hamas in power in Gaza?
Well, I think it's going to be impossible to completely eradicate Hamas. I mean, there was a Washington Post article the other day that said 5,000 Hamas militants out of 30,000 have been killed. My sense is that the group was preparing for this and likely sent out some operational commanders out of the country, perhaps beforehand, maybe to Lebanon, maybe to Iran or elsewhere. So they're preparing for the aftermath, the post-conflict setting. I don't know that the Israelis are. I don't see a military strategy or approach that's tied to concrete political objectives. And again, another factor in a lot of what brought us to this point is the fact that Netanyahu was trying to balance Hamas off of Fatah in the West Bank and to deny both the opportunity for, anything kind of tangible. Hamas was in many ways kind of, artificially inflated, right? In some ways, Netanyahu was playing footsie with them and kind of keeping this going, thinking that they were content to, deal with the economic benefits and gains, and kind of totally misread what this group is about. It's hard thinking through what a political settlement looks like. But I would say if you take a step back and look historically, we have to be prepared for some fairly unpalatable figures, including potentially some within Hamas, to be part of a future Palestinian state. People would have said it's impossible for Jerry Adams, a former member of the IRA Army Council, to ever be in a future British government, right? Where he was with Sinn Féin. Same thing with Nelson Mandela at one point. So look, insurgents, and to say nothing of the Irgun and Menachem Begin, right? The Israelis should know this. Insurgents and terrorists and rebels and whatever you want to call them, guerrilla movements, do transition to politics. And that, I think, is one of the few ways that this is going to be sustainable. If Hamas is totally shut out of a political process, you're essentially condemning to, a lifelong splinter group that the Israelis are going to be fighting against.
I guess the only difference in this case is that we've already been through this, right? There was a peace accords with the Oslo peace accords and Fatah largely. But DFLP, the PFLP, the Islamic Jihad, Hamas were invited into some of that, and in some ways did participate in the Palestinian parliament to begin with. After some of them were jailed by Arafat for blowing up buses in Tel Aviv and elsewhere. So why isn't it morally right and militarily feasible, and there's two questions there, for Israel to say that's it? Hamas has got to be removed from running Gaza. Whether they can wipe out every single fighter, of course not, but why is an eradication of them as a ruling authority in the Gaza Strip that is bent on attacking Israel and never participating in any kind of peace process, why isn't it feasible?
Well, so it's not feasible militarily for the reasons you just alluded to. They're going to remain. They've run a vast tunnel network. Whether it's morally right, I have no problem morally with eradicating a terrorist group. It's more the operational realities. Secondarily, maybe primarily, can something be morally right? Attacking this group when you look at the byproduct, when you look at the second order impact of 15,000+ civilians killed.
Yeah, yeah.
You also said,
but what's, Colin, sorry, and I don't mean to interrupt, but just before you move on from that, what's the alternative? Because you can't suddenly put in motion a political process and say, let's talk about a two-state solution, which, by the way, the Israelis, after 1,200 people are dead and over 200 of them are kidnapped, and how would you suddenly move to a political process that would involve this group that attacks? This group is not after a two-state solution. This group, Hamas, is after the eradication of Israel from the river to the sea.
Yeah. So again, if you were to tell me that Jerry Adams would be part of any kind of future government, and there was multiple attempts there too. I mean, we can go back to the Sunningdale Agreement in 1973, Anglo-Irish in 85, Downing Street Declaration in 93, multiple attempts, multiple failures. We did a study at RAND where we looked at 71 insurgencies from the end of World War II to 2009. The median length of these conflicts was a decade, right? A decade. So it depends how you want to start measuring when this conflict began, when it ended. And I agree. If I was in Israel, I wouldn't want to even consider that as a possibility. I'm not even making it as a policy recommendation. I'm saying historically, when we look at these conflicts and how they actually end, the sustainable ones are ones that actually bring bad actors into a government and make those actors responsible for governing, right, in some kind of fashion. They're, again, not always, they're often unsavory actors, but I would ask you, what's the alternative? To fight forever? I mean, if the Israelis haven't eradicated Hamas,
why? Sorry, if you've asked me, isn't the alternative to bring the more moderate, in many ways secular, Palestinian Authority, Fatah, and those on board with them, back in to rule the Gaza Strip, even though Prime Minister Netanyahu has said that's impossible and he would never allow it. But isn't that the real solution, that Hamas is pushed out and that Abu Mazen and Fatah are invited back to retake Gaza, and if necessary, jail members of Hamas that won't go along with future peace accords and future agreements with Israel?
again, if we're talking about feasibility, I just, you're looking at a time now where Hamas is probably more popular than it's been. If you look at the recent, exchange of hostages and prisoners, you're alongside those yellow Fatah flags, you saw many green Hamas flags in the West Bank. So I would ask you, is the PA, is this a democratic election? I mean, who's responsible for this? Will the Palestinians be able to vote? And if they do, is it Hamas or Fatah that wins? So look, I haven't seen a clear explanation of what the right solution is here in terms of political settlements. I've been reading a lot, listening to a lot of people much smarter than me. But I think if we don't at least start hammering out the contours of what a future political settlement looks like, then we're already behind the eight ball.
I agree. Somebody has to start, and they should have started yesterday. And Netanyahu probably is the only guy that is unwilling to start some kind of political process. But can I ask you just about the threat of terror attacks? Europe is warned of a high threat warning now, and Christopher Wray from the FBI has said that, red lights are blinking everywhere. He's never seen it like this, and obviously. And Soufan, by the way, I think you already know, has written a report recently this week talking about the manipulation, even using AI on some of the social media platforms. But the fury, the anger, certainly could fuel an attack from extremists, and people are pretty well expecting something to go bang here.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at warnings from Director Wray here in the United States. If you look at some of the warnings in Europe around soft targets, and I just returned from Europe over the weekend. I was there for a week, and the chatter among law enforcement professionals, there's very heightened alert, especially around soft targets and Christmas markets. We've even seen groups like the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda attempt to take advantage of the conflict in Gaza, even as both of them, have consistently denigrated Hamas as an apostate regime or group for A, sitting for elections, and B, cooperating with a Shia group or a Shia country in Iran. So at the same time, they denigrate Hamas, but they're attempting to leverage and take advantage of the collective rage among individuals throughout parts of the West to spur them, right, to radicalize them and push them over the edge to conduct an attack. In fact, if we don't see some kind of an attempt over the coming weeks, I'll be surprised. There was a 15-year-old in Germany who was recently rolled up for planning to blow up a Christmas market. There was a recent attack in Paris. I think I was reading about another stabbing this morning. So, these things are probably inevitable. The question is there something larger? But I would say, if you look at what happened here, I think it was maybe the day before Thanksgiving on the U.S.-Canadian border, there was a car that crashed and blew up. And the immediate concern and really obsession was that it was a car bomb and terrorism. So I would say that terrorism works, right? Psychologically, people are scared, they're skittish, they're on edge, they're looking at things and, very worried. So we're already in that kind of phase. We're in that paradigm. I would be really shocked if we don't see some kind of an attempt. Let's hope nothing, succeeds, but, emotions are high, I think, on all sides. So it's likely that we're going to see something in the West.
Please be wrong, Colin.
I hope I am.
Last question to you. You're watching all your internal politics in the United States, and the fourth Republican debate last night, just doesn't seem to deal with foreign affairs and really what's going on in the world. But do you see, like, how do you see is the policy and pressure on Israel playing out as we roll into 2024 under a Biden administration, but with a Trump presidency possibly looming out there as well?
Yeah, it's kind of a mess here in the U.S. and in terms of domestic politics. Look, the administration has signaled, support for Israel as both. It's one of the few bipartisan agreements in this country, particularly in an election year. But at the same time, some of the polls are worrying for the administration demographically. When you look at Gen Z, when you look at Arab and Muslim Americans who have voted Democrat in the past, who are now saying they're going to sit out the election. And I think, there's a perception among the younger generation that the Biden administration has written Israel a blank check, and there's American blood on the hands. There's Palestinian blood on America's hands for supplying weapons to Israel that have killed civilians. That's the one of the kind of big narratives and themes that's driving a lot of the protests here in the United States. So I think the administration's in a very tough position and is going to have to really kind of work magic to thread that needle. And of course, with a potential Trump presidency looming in the background, it's a really kind of time of great tension here in the United States. And I think you're right. And I watched the debate last night. We're not really talking about real issues there. We're fighting over identity politics and transgender and all sorts of things that are. I mean, again, I'm a foreign policy expert. That's what I tend to focus on. But I'd say 80% of the things that these candidates are arguing about are, really not major issues to most Americans.
And the candidate wasn't there.
But yeah, which is just bizarre.
Yeah. Colin Clarke with the Soufan Center. Colin, great to talk to you. Good to see you.
Thanks, Dana.